But I think the big question is going to be, moving forward, what emerges successfully, and whether they control the new current account settlement method, the new reserve currency, whether they're still on top of it. Because to them, they don't care, Donald, if it's the US dollar, if it's the Israeli shekel, if it's the Chad pound. As it always goes back to that simple explanation, they don't care as long as they control the currency. They care not who makes the laws as long as they're controlling the currency. So we know that their game plan will be, create as many distractions as you can, send the dogs barking at all the caravans in all the wrong direction. They will go after control of whatever the new currency that arises is. That is absolutely sure.
You made a good point on our conversation this afternoon, Mohammed, that this new SWIFT system that's being set up by the BRICS countries, and if you haven't heard about this, ladies and gentlemen, SWIFT, of course, is the settlement system that the international banks use to do transactions internationally or trans-border or across anywhere. You use a SWIFT code. I have a SWIFT code. Everybody has a code if they're going to make a transfer anywhere. And essentially, countries have them, businesses have them, they all have them. So they actually control the flow of capital around the world through the SWIFT system. Well, that trade and settlement system is being rejigged into another form. And what we've got here is the BRICS countries putting up fiber optic cabling to connect themselves independent of the old SWIFT system. And it looks like they're going to try and launch their own. But you made a very good point that these criminals may, in fact, be doing all they can to be a founding member of that. Because, one of the things I talked to you about a few weeks ago when we talked was that Russia's Gazprom, was doing a major gas deal with Israel to take the gas that should belong to the Palestinians off their coast, but the Israelis are going to steal it from them, and they're going to sell it directly into the Gazprom system. So one has to wonder, with these kind of deals, knowing how tied Gazprom is into the Russian hierarchy, what is going on here? And what kind of deals are being made in smoky back rooms, and how this SWIFT system will work, and will it work in favor of the criminals who've just moved out of the American system into another, and they just put up their new system with these guys participating? I think it's a very real possibility.
And also, just the fact that they need to control the currency. So that settlement system, which we know Russia has been trying to mull it over to some degree with China and some of the South American countries that they've got influence with, to say, because you remember that picture of Medvedev when he had that gold coin. He actually minted a gold coin and said this could be our reserve currency. When we look more closely at what they were discussing, they talked about a basket of these metals, Darryl. So they had gold, they had silver, they had platinum, they had palladium, I think molybdenum, and a few of the rare metals of high value. And they were also saying that at that time that they were saying, well, how would we settle this? Because the SWIFT system, as we know, has been caught up in the spying scandal, in the NSA spying scandal. We now know that Visa transactions and the SWIFT system's been hacked into and by the NSA, and they've been unlawfully looking at international transactions without warrants, etc. But that only adds another dimension. These guys have sat down and said, well, okay, we can have an international reserve currency for the current account. And we must remember this also, Darryl. They're not talking about the capital account. They're only talking about the current account. So the settling of those hard assets. They're not looking at, the bank international settlements and the transactions between them and the rules that come out through the BIS. It's a much smaller objective. And the reason for that is it's more realizable. And what they said was, if we come up with a new currency that's got some kind of asset that backs it, like the bullion, etc., we're still left with the problem of what that settlement system would be. And I think the usual suspects who've taken control of gold or paper currencies. Fiat asset-backed currency makes no difference to them as long as they control it. They're looking at these discussions. They're not blind to it. They're aware that these things are going on. And I'm fairly sure, Darryl, that they're thinking to themselves, if we get involved in this and then pull the plug on the United States, transfer the current account system to this new international reserve currency, it really means that Americans won't be able to pull themselves up by the socks. They won't have that power of being able to reach out to the world and not worry about the inflation in the assets, and they won't worry about the FX exposure of purchasing assets and fruit and vegetables, whatever's coming from around the world. They'll find themselves in a very dark and difficult new world where people, will be pricing against them. Everything will be priced in the favor of the producer and not the consumer. It's a complete reversal.
Well, now interesting that, and probably people that listen to these broadcasts have heard this. London has already made their bid to be part of this new settlement system. They want to be able to transact outside of the dollarized settlement system. And I don't know how far down that road they have gone, but I'm guessing that the criminal elites that have bled out the value and the wealth from the United States over the last 4 or 5 decades are now, the internationalists that they are now ready to jump ship and turn America into the prison country that Russia was when it became the Soviet Union. I mean, they couldn't travel past borders. They had internal checkpoints. They had all the kinds of things that Russia suffered through for 80 years is going to be suffered upon the United States in spades. In other words, even with a more strict control grid because of technology. And I believe they're going to implode the place for probably a better part of a century. And in that meantime, the rest of the world will go on its merry way, expanding itself with their leadership and control fully established. Now, the Chinese, I've learned so much about the Chinese ties to the Jews, and I did that through reading a book called The Jews of China. And what I didn't realize, Muhammad, was that Mao Zedong had a bunch of Jews that surrounded him as confidants and as people that were really whispering in his ear about everything, especially toward the late 1960s when the guy was just a big gelatinous tub of lard who liked little children, to be delivered to him. So that country's emergence relied largely after the 1970s when Kissinger, of course, opened up. They say Nixon did, but Kissinger opened up China at the behest of the criminal bankers. And they lent the money, the technology, the know-how to build these massive factories and go on this tear that they've gone on. Now, of course, there's always going to be independent-minded Chinese vying for influence against these bankers. But by and large, they're in the pocket of them as well in many ways. And I don't see anybody in any country in the world independent of these crooks. Am I wrong in making that assessment?
Well, they certainly, wherever they need influence, they've made sure that they've had that influence there, Darren. We look throughout the centuries and we see that the Zoharites, the people that followed Sabotage Zevi that you mentioned at the beginning, they, as a group, collectively, they are the Zoharites. They made sure.
The Jabotinskis, the Stern Gang, the Irgun. I mean, there are more modern incantations of that movement, but they're basically wife-swapping filthy pigs is what they are, Mohammed.
That's right, and Moranos, all of these groups of Zoharites, in that they reject the Torah and the Talmud, and they only accept the book, the Zohar. That was what Zevi said to them, just as a point of clarification. He said, and he had a mass book burning. Not many people know this, and his movement. We covered this in previous shows now, but just to recap, I mean, he ended up with 1 million followers in 1670, which is an incredible number of a cult. If we imagined a cult today that had 1 million members, we'd think that was fairly impressive. So to have done that in the 17th century was quite some going. And a lot of the Orthodox Jews did follow him. He was rejected in Jerusalem. So that was very important and ran into various issues there. The point is that he said to his followers, if you really believe I'm the Messiah, then I tell you that the book of God is fulfilled and the laws no longer exist. And he told them that nothing that they did could ever be believed as a sin. And they got into the incest. It wasn't just wife swapping, it was with children and sisters and things like this as well, because he challenged the people. He said, do you really believe I'm the Messiah? And then when they said we do, he said, well, if you really believe in me, there are two things that we do. One is the big book burning, and these were handwritten books. These weren't even printed books now. These were maybe some of them 1700 years old, passed down through families. They had a massive public book burning of the Torah and the Talmud, and he said the only book we follow from this day forward is the Zohar, and that's why we call them collectively Zoharites.
And that is a good part of the Zoharite philosophy is the Kabbalah.
Well, it's basically the Kabbalistic teachings and the Kabbalah and its associated teachings lifted from the Talmud. It's from a theological perspective, we would say it's a book of magic. Whether one believes in that or not is a different matter, but theologically we would define that as a book of magic. And that's what. And he said to them, if you really believe I'm the Messiah, the second thing, you believe there is no more the concept of sin. And they said, yes, we believe that. I said, well, if you really believe it, go home and sleep with your mothers and your sisters and your daughters to prove to me that you believe there is no sin. And that's why part of the acceptance of Zevi in the Zoharite movement is to not believe in the concept of sin at all. And that the belief in sin is to do with the people who are, I suppose the Zoharite equivalent of calling them maybe heathens, or their version of Goyim. And these people have hijacked and sit behind Judaism and even pretend to be Orthodox Jews. As we know, they've got that Orthodox look about them.
Yeah, with the Lubavitch.
The Lubavitch are a great example. Probably 80 to 90% of the Lubavitch are actually truly Zoharite, and there's 10% of them don't know that the rest are Zoharite. They're waiting to corrupt. So they've been working as a force within inside the Jewish community to corrupt them, but they've controlled it ever since the days of Jacob Frank, and because Jacob Frank, of course, became the scholar or the caliph, whatever we want to call him. He was more a caliph because he was a successor of Zevi. He was the caliph for Moses Amschel Bauer, who changed his name to Rothschild and began all the Rothschild movement. That was all done under the umbrella of the Frankist, what people call the Frankist movement, but again, Zoharite. Well, by putting all these different titles there, they failed throughout history, Darryl, to recognize it's the same single group with the same single core belief system. And they have recognized since that time till now, control the money and control whatever you need to control. And this is the point now to the question that you asked. Whatever they need to control in order to control that money, whether that's direct power or influence over the direct power, whichever they've needed to do and whichever they can do, that's what they've always gone for. So they will be looking now in the same way that they're trying to get one of their lot to take over in the Egyptian revolution, which we'll come on to in a little bit. The whole point is that, when there's a genuine revolution that they are not actually a part of, they're now fomenting a fake revolution so that they can actually take control of it. Anything that goes against them, we know from history, they don't leave it to grow legs and get bigger and stronger. They try to nip it in the bud and take it out early. So they are looking in advance at the new system, because a new system theoretically could set the world free. A new current account clearing system could free the world in favour of the producers in all these poor countries, in the same way that the fair trade concept has, in trying to give people a fair payment for what they already get. A truly international reserve currency owned by the producers of the world would look after their best interests rather than those that are benefiting from the consuming side. So it could be great. It could also just be like the movement from a gold-backed system to a fiat system, that as long as they control it during that transition period, they're still in control. And that's what we're up against, really.
Well, you know, Mohammed, chaos theory and the law of unintended consequences are certainly what we all hope will benefit us in the final analysis. And what we've seen over the last, well, we've been doing this, you and I together 8 years, but 10 years for me on this subject, and you 20 years or 30, even more. Truth of the matter is that we are finally getting traction, and that traction has come as a result of people being battered to the point of desperation. And, you know, the idea that, what's his name there, saying that, you know, when people lose everything, they lose it. Well, the truth of the matter is they are losing everything. They see it now, and they're actually demanding answers. And when they go out and look for those answers, the message that you and I have been clearly stating for the better part of the 8 years we've worked together is the right one. Now, I, of course, was not up to the speed I am now in the beginning of this, and nobody could have guessed how deep the rabbit hole went, even you, because some of the information wasn't even available when you started learning this stuff, or even when we started opening up the truth about this. They are being exposed globally in almost every place they operate. I'm wondering if you'll maybe address this. Is it too little too late for us, or are they really battling to survive this criminal takeover of the world?
Well, it's an interesting situation that we find ourselves at the moment, Darrell. I mean, it's been a hard slog through the French Connection.
Yep.
People who followed the French Connection for years know that when you go around the internet today and you see comments in mainstream media, whether it's British or American or Australian or New Zealand or Russia or China newspapers, people in the comments sections, and I'm talking about the mainstream media, not the alternative, are very clued up. I mean, if you go back 6 or 7 years ago, stuff that people are writing in the comments sections today, if you'd have written that back then, you know, those people would have just been hounded out of existence and ridiculed and mocked and called the lunatic fringe, all the various names that we've endured and come through and managed to weather. And through doing that and being totally consistent with the message and never changing and showing people what the truth is, maybe finding errata and correcting it, and to doing that learning process with people, reading the books with the public out there, what we've ended up with is a core of people that cannot be swayed because they understand the truth in the tens of thousands, and that tens of thousands.
I think it's more like tens of millions. Believe
well, that tens of thousands has now gone up exponentially in the same way the earthquake factors. You know, each one of them has spread out tenfold, and each one of them has spread out tenfold, and that's probably we've had a tenfold increase per annum for about 3 or 4 years in a row, which means that we're now in the hundreds of millions, which is great news. And the fact of the matter is that you will see those people calling out Alex Jones. I mean, you see it in mainstream media. I could be reading the Daily Telegraph or the Financial Times, or I could be on a blog looking at BlackBerry release information for my mobile phone, and somebody will be saying, "Oh, that Alex Jones, he's just a stuffed shirt. He's a disinfo guy. He's there trying to take people away from the real message." You read those arguments in places that absolutely were only on the French connection. There can be no doubt about that, where the call-outs all occurred. And I see it, or every time I see it in these strange, disparate places now, it makes me giggle because, of course, there was some real heat taken at that time, Darryl. I remember you ringing me up at all hours of the day and night and all days of the week, you know, with the pressure and the feeling, the stress of it. But by sticking with it and not giving in like so many others who fell by the wayside along the way, that's given people the confidence to realise, you know, sticking with the truth and adhering to it gives you that strength. We've come out of it so strong, and the results of the works have been so strong. The question now arises, what do we do with that? Because we've got a highly informed, on a large scale, public. Among the things I've enjoyed enormously, more recently within the last few months, have been the confrontation by the people in the United States of their elected representatives. The call-outs of John McCain over the past few weeks, the man has been absolutely ridiculed. If I were him, I would lock the door, stay in the house and never go outside. Petraeus walked on New York University campus and got followed by hundreds of students calling him a murderer and a war criminal and a murdering pig, etc., which is absolutely fantastic to see. So, you know, the point is that people are emboldened through this knowledge. Maybe they don't know exactly what to do, but the anger is just there below the surface, and there's enough anger to make people get up there and go out and start shouting. I'm glad that it's reached that stage culturally, but nothing's going to change, Darryl, and we've said this from the first day, and this is a very hard truth. Nothing's going to change until people change it with their hands. And we can go and shout. It goes back to the old Muslim Arab saying, you know, the dogs may bark, but the caravan moves on. And one of the ways in which the Zoharites have managed the situation in the West with the so-called democratic appearance is they've said, as long as the dogs are barking, we don't mind, providing our caravan keeps moving. If they interfere with the caravan, then, you know, they send somebody out to deal with the dogs. And we've seen many of our good fellow comrades and in this fight, you know, being murdered, great journalists, people who've stood up for truth, murdered or frightened off. We haven't bowed at all. We've come out of it bloody. We've suffered quite a bit along the way, but truth will always out, Darryl. These are very old sayings. The truth will always out. And the point is that when truth comes, you know, it always, throughout history, it's always destroyed all falsehood in front of it. And we looked at this massive mountain of falsehood, called it out repeatedly. It's crumbled, but nothing new will come until people realise they've got to pick up the reins of power. They've got to go out there and say to these people, we just shouted at you, you didn't get the message, you didn't stand down, so we've come to take over City Hall. Get out. You know, it's going to come to that, because that's the only way the change will occur. Whether people are able in the United States, and it's the United States that I fear for more than anywhere at the moment, if they're not able to do that in a quick enough time, I think they will do it eventually, Darryl, but I have a feeling they might do it when, you know, they're at the bottom of the sewer, and when it's that dark and there's a new currency situation in the world and a new way of settling the current account, that actually they can't, because they can't get out. They won't be able to get out, even though they can change the leadership. The rest of the world may reject them because they've taken so long and done so much damage in the process. I think they've helped themselves a lot over the Syrian crisis. I think the fact that the people have turned up and said to their elected representatives, over our dead body, even members of the military, you know, nice to see them saying, and that maybe they don't understand the picture, but it shows the heart's in the right place, Darryl. They're saying, I didn't join the army to fight alongside Al-Qaeda, you know. maybe they don't understand the reality of the situation, but somewhere inside, even they're realizing something's wrong with the picture.
Yeah.
This picture doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And I realize I'm being used as an idiot here and a tool, and I don't want to be used like that. So there's an awakening even at that level, where people with the least knowledge and the greatest obedience to their masters are saying, this sucks, it's not adding up, and I don't want to go along with it. Is it enough? Well, you know, I mean, it's a tough thing to say, but we deal with the truth here at the French Connection. The bottom line is they're informed. They've got to go the extra mile now. They've really got to start telling these people, you're not going to do a rethink on this. We are going to pull the plug on that. We are going to abolish the NSA spying, because contrary to what people might believe, nobody wants, outside of America, people don't want America to fail. The Muslims don't want Christian America to fail. It's absolutely not true, and it never has been true. America should be the guiding light in the world that it could have been. And it's, you know, one of the most heartbreaking things in all of this, Darryl, you know, with all the bad news that we've had to endure, is when you look at the mess that these Zoharite pigs have made, and you start thinking, what could have been in the world if Americans had stuck with their WASP, that white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, I don't mean any racist element in that, but that Protestant work ethic and that leadership to the world. I heard something from what's the chap who was governor, who does conspiracy theory.
Yeah. What's his name there? The wrestler.
Yeah.
All right. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I heard another way. He's come out with a few good statements, you know, one of which was, I love my country, not my government, you know, which is important about
Jesse Ventura.
Yeah. Jesse Ventura, that's it. Sorry for forgetting that. Again, not the sharpest knife in the drawer, not the best informed, but you know, enough to realise, you know, something is seriously gone awry here, and he's trying to say to people, you know, at a different level to the French Connection, because he's not going to that depth of truth, but he's saying to people, you know, our elected representatives are not representing us, and trying to make people realise that even the system, he's actually challenging the system, because he's saying whether you vote Republican or Democrat, he's written a book about it apparently, he's saying they're the same. They're the same. There's no difference. But voting for one or voting for the other doesn't change anything. So even he's trying to say to people, the original freedoms that America was principled upon and its constitutions have actually been absorbed and destroyed through this fake democratic process which is out there. And I think more and more people are going to realise that the actual process itself is fake, and it's going to challenge even at the real core level anything moving forward for America. They're going to really have to rethink that framework and why people were allowed to override the Constitution. You know, how can you be there swearing an oath to defend it and then ignore it? You know, there's not enough safeguards in place around that area, because if everything went back to being a constitutional republic rather than a democracy that recognises a constitution, which is where we've ended up at the moment, yeah. You'd have the country would be a great leadership in the world, not just for itself, but setting an example for the world. All the things that were great in America were born out of that Republican set of ideals through their constitution. And everything that the world dislikes about what's coming out from America at the moment comes from the overriding of that constitution and the so-called fake democratic process, which is owned by which is owned by big business, owned by the Zoharites, but is also infiltrated by Israeli and Zoharite influence. all these things together, when you look at them and see what should be, you can see how different the world should have been by now, and what a much better place we could have to leave for our later generations.
But Mohammed, here's the problem that we all face, and I'll be the first to admit this. Back in the 1950s, when they really started working hard, after World War II was over, they put themselves in earnest to refashion America, and do that through subordinating certain cultural norms that we all accepted in the United States. And then by early 1960s, when they saw that how volatile their own actions could make the society, and that was the hippies and flower power and anti-war and the rest of it, they brilliantly, criminals that they brilliantly used it as a way of destroying the cohesion socially within the society. And they've been successful. I've watched the deterioration of America decade after decade get worse and worse. And just when you thought it couldn't get this bad, you wait 10 years and look back, and what you thought was bad, it seems mild in comparison. I got to be honest, they have used great skill in presenting to the public the titillating elements that almost unknowingly destroy your moral fiber. A good example was the invention of rock and roll. That was a Jewish construct, and it was the Jewish power elite in the recording and film industry and so forth that forwarded that proffered that into our minds, and then they used it as a tool of delineating change within families by calling your parents, the enemy, or anybody. I remember the big saying, anybody over 30 is not to be trusted, or, and all of this nonsense, and the inflicting of drugs upon us by their control over the CIA and the Golden Triangle and the drug movement around the world. And, this kind of stuff, little by slowly, took the building blocks of society out from under us. And of course, the first building block is a solid family. And I remember someone saying to me years ago, if you want to know where the white community is going, look where the black community is now, because in 5 years, that's where you'll be. And I remember looking at the destruction of the family back in the 60s to the black community. And then, of course, drugs were inflicted on them terribly in the 70s and 80s until they were just a shell of a cohesive group. Most of the kids were being brought up in single-parent homes on welfare and the whole bit. This was not the moral construct of the black community back in the 40s and 50s, and in fact, because there was no welfare state, if you didn't work as a human being back in those days, you didn't eat. And of course, now we're in a situation where we have completely lost our path in life. We've lost our family values. We've got pornography. We've got no religious grounding. And I'm not talking about being a believer in God or not. I'm talking about those moral constructs of what religion offered us. And then, of course, they infiltrated the Catholic Church and then made it a policy to inflict homosexual priests on us. And, the upper echelon of the Catholic Church, once it fell victim to the Zionists, if they had not fallen victim, you would not be going to your mass and hearing a lisping foofy guy, issuing the mass, and knowing this guy's doing the nasty with some other guy after mass. And this is exactly what's happened. So they've undermined faith. They've undermined the family. They've undermined the faith in the government. America doesn't trust anybody within government. So there's nothing left. Where we are just a rudderless ship in a stormy sea. And I wonder if we can even pull ourselves back from this precipice, Mohammed.
Unfortunately, it is about pulling back, Darrell. The awareness is there. We've done our bit to try and make sure that people understand what the facts really need to be. I think in the battles for information and the war for truth, I think that that's more or less over as far as I'm concerned. It's established. It's clear. the information that's spread throughout the world is highly cleansed and highly accurate, relatively speaking. When we see people at the different, at very, very superficial levels, like Jesse Ventura, actually realizing, the whole process doesn't work. Maybe not going as deeply behind why it doesn't work, but acknowledging that it doesn't. It really shows us that the idea that voting for one party or another is going to make the change isn't going to happen. This was Obama was elected on this slogan, yes, we can, and change you can believe in, and all these brilliant marketing slogans that were thrown out there. But I think that people are now really seeing it for what it is. And the point about the Constitution and the Republican ideal and the Protestant ethic that it was built on is that none of that was slogan. It was actually a way of life.
It was practice, that's right.
Yeah, it was a way of life. It was a way of looking at the world and understanding the world and saying, how do we make the most out of this life? And how do we make the most out of this world for ourselves and each other at the same time? It was a way of having a common platform and a common bond that united people in the endeavours of looking after each other as part of looking after themselves. And really, simple idiom that people can believe in, true ones, do to others as you'd have them do unto yourself. Americans were always these people who supported the underdog in the fight, even though we probably knew he was going to lose, but we'd cheer him on anyway because he was giving it heart and soul. All of that stuff which lifts man above from animals. No matter whether you put it in a religious context or a spiritual context or an intellectual context, that kind of scenario is something that doesn't happen anywhere else in the kingdom of animals and creation. It's unique to human beings that supporting someone you know is going to lose, but just because they're putting so much into it, we love them so much for putting that much in. These are a very unusual context, and America was very good at giving those kind of ideals to the world and helping the rest of the world think in those terms. So it not only had a moral compass, but it lived that moral compass, and it showed the rest of the world how to do it. And really, without that, and all of that was bedded, and this is the point now that we're going back to, it was bedded in the Constitution and Republican ideals. That's where that grew out from, with a Protestant culture to boot as well. So can America get back there? Yes, it can.
Now, it's going to take generational work, Mohammed. I don't think it can be done. Look, I really believe we're too far gone to make a solution in short order. I don't think the health emotionally, mentally, spiritually is there for this to take place. I think it's going to take intergenerational change, but we first have to be able to codify the criminal element into our educational process. That means, you see, we have outed these people so many times in history. In the last 100 years, Father Conklin outed them, and Archibald Ramsey outed them, and Ezra Pound outed them, and what's his name? Ben Friedman outed them. I mean, they've been outed repeatedly. The fact of the matter is that we've never been able to get traction on interrupting their course. Again, you brought that wonderful analogy of the caravan moving on. They've always been able to keep the caravan moving on. I believe there is a groundswell of numbers, not forgetting that Conklin had 30 million followers. But I have to believe globally we are approaching numbers beyond that. And we've got to be able to parlay those numbers into real education of the public that Zionist criminal Jews, these Zoharite criminals, who, if you want to watch the movie, the one with God, I can't. With the gun Kubrick did, with what's his name there? The guy from the Scientology there.
Oh,
Anyway,
Eyes Wide
Eyes
Shut.
Wide Shut. That is the real Zoharitis party time. That's what they do.
Yep,
That's who they are.
yep.
And they're filthy, immoral pigs. And they will murder, rape, kill, pillage, and plunder anybody and anything. And if you don't get that, you really have missed the entire message. And we've got to be able to turn this into real understanding so that when we finally do have the tipping point in knowledge, there aren't enough of their followers to fight us back. Now, as it stands right now, they own these, grunting morons who have become policemen, these steroid taking dips who run around and pound the crap out of people for sport. They do own largely much of the military and much of the infrastructure, and certainly they control the spying apparatus. So we're not anywhere near winning this yet, but it's got to be done through education. We've said that from the beginning. I'm wondering, do we have a listening public who's mindful enough to even make these links? I have to tell you, most people are too stupid to make the links. That doesn't mean all. It means most. And I don't know if the fact that we have a powerful minority is going to be enough. I would like your input on that, Mohammed.
Well, there's a few good points there, Daryl. Will it take generations to change? Well, it's certainly going to take more than one, because what we've seen in America, and we discussed this afternoon, is the destruction of American culture has taken a couple of generations. It's not something that's happened instantly, is it, Daryl? They've attacked it since the 1950s and have been chipping away and chipping away. And what happens with all these things is that, the more you chip, the more pieces fall away and fall away and fall away. So there has been an acceleration in their successes through probably the back end of the 1980s, the 90s, and into the mid-2000s, when it looked like that they had got this whole fight sewn up. And we're very much, in this, the underdog. We're in the, if we were watching Rocky VI, we're now in the 10th round. we've got up in the last 30 seconds, having been beaten to a pulp. You can't see our face because it looks like a bright red marshmallow, and we've started fighting back. So we're maybe not in the best of shapes to fight back from. But we've certainly got the heart for it, and the fact of the matter is, yeah, it's going to happen probably in Rocky VII. It's not going to happen in this generation. What's happening here is that we've drawn the line in the sand to say this can't go any further, and we've got to push the tide back. So we're setting the tide to go back, but the rebuilding is going to take a long time. The children are so badly damaged.
Yes.
And when I say children, I'm talking like 2 generations of children.
Yes.
That actually really being able to preserve the 3rd generation means that we're going to have to be really put all sorts of things in place to protect the new generations coming through, so that
Yes.
we'll have to hide what went on, maybe even, until such time as it gets. It's almost like something out of a movie, because we can't allow them to be influenced by what's gone on.
Well, Mohammed, before you go on, I mean, your analogy to using Sylvester Stallone, his mother is one of the biggest strip club owners in the country, and he's a Zoharitis Jew.
Yeah, yeah.
So I mean, even the mainstay of our of our analogies and our analogous arguments are going to be peppered with the sicknesses that these people have inflicted on us. That the point you've made is very important, because now we've been vaccinated out of our bodies have been vaccinated into a state of illness. Our environment has been polluted to the state of a poisoning. And our food supply has been adulterated to the point of disgust. And the fact is, we have to reverse those things, or whatever seeds we plant won't grow.
Mm.
And you're right. You're absolutely
Absolutely.
right.
And it's gonna take such a long time. I mean, one of the ways that we can see the guilt of people in Hollywood, because this stands so clear when you see the mainstream media. Um, they're allowing these comments on their websites because the people have woken up. They can't stop it. There's just that many people making that. I imagine that there's probably a part of our army has been banned worldwide from comments from, in the first 2 or 3 years when we were encouraging people to go out and do that, Daryl. The fact of the matter is, I bet we've had tens of millions of people probably banned around the world. But eventually so many people have seen it and woken up that they realise we can't ban it, or we don't have anybody coming here. We don't get to put our article out at all. So the way that we know Hollywood is guilty is through, like the mainstream media, through their silence. We don't hear anybody of any note with the influence of these famous people coming up and speaking out. Maybe Stanley Kubrick, with Eyes Wide Shut, just before he died, not to film together, to try and stick the finger at these guys just before he was carried off. We've had quite a lot of that. That's not the same as people like Ezra Pound who've gone out there and been locked up in mental institutions.
Yeah.
Other people who've been killed, other people who've been ridiculed. These people don't have the guts, but they've got the money. They've got enough. Okay, you're not going to make any more films. Do you remember one of the Hollywood greats made a statement once, and I mean they beat on him so hard, and that was Marlon Brando.
Yes. They killed one of his kids because of it, I think.
Yeah, the whole, but the point is, he was a proper tough guy, and he was turning around and and he's what America should be standing for. And I think that what part of the way that they try to in quote marks teach a lesson is when somebody does speak out, they hit on them so hard and their family so hard that they try to make everybody else too frightened. Well, guess what? If you start living in that fear, you end up with the America that we've got today. And America isn't predicated on cowardice. It's predicated on people, under that Constitution saying you maintain an armed militia and be ready to put your life down to maintain your freedoms. That's what America was predicated on. That's what keeps it safe. That's what gives people the great life, knowing that if you've got to throw down, then you throw down. And when you throw down, you're throwing down with your family. You're throwing down with your livelihood, everything. It's not just for, this isn't rocky show business. This is rocky real life. And when you go out, you really do put everything on the line in this game. That's what we've done. And the point is, these people have got money, they've got influence, they're difficult to touch. They'll come out and speak on a whole manner of issues for, popularity purposes. Oh, I want to save people in Africa. Oh, I want to adopt a child. Oh, I want to support gay rights. They're very vocal when it's about popularity. These people have sold us down the Swanee. They are very important people in Hollywood, could have come and stepped forward, and the reason they haven't is Kubrick's film. These people are all absolutely blackmailed, and if they're not blackmailed, they're blackmailable. That's the only way they get into those. They look for a particular type of character that's easy to beat down, easy to make them frightened, easy to make them think they're going to lose their career so that they just shut up. But the fact of the matter is that they like to talk the talk. Rocky Balboa and speaking for the little guy and all this, that and the other. Stallone himself has never spoken out on anything. Nothing about the illegal wars, nothing about the immoral, this, that and the other. His silence says more about him than his artwork. And it's the truth for the rest of the people in Hollywood. all of these cultural things are going to have to change as part of this bigger fight, Daryl, and through the generations. You see, Stallone recognized in those Rocky films the American nature of supporting the underdog, supporting the guy who's working hard. He made a fortune out of American culture and American values, but he's doing nothing with what he's earned to defend them now. You know, this is the point. You know, it's one thing to make money out of it from an art perspective. In this fight, Daryl, it ultimately will come down to taking over City Hall. People have got to go back in there with the Republican agenda into City Hall, and with that Protestant work ethic, we have a duty of care to our future generations, our progeny, our descendants, the world to come. We have a duty to them to leave something better than the state we're in now, and we're going to have to work hard, and we're going to have to sacrifice, and we're going to have to maybe live without, but we've got to give them something better, and we've got to make sure that what's happened in the world doesn't repeat by giving them further lessons and really building on that infrastructure. And part of this, as we've always said, Daryl, it's probably the most bitter pill to swallow out of the lot, but the bottom line is something has to be done about the people who are behind the force that has brought this sickness into the world. That clash is unavoidable.
Yeah, and you know, a lot of people have said, well, if we just take away their levers of power, then we'll be fine. I don't agree with that. I don't believe it. Unless we eliminate the threat, they will reemerge stronger and better able to subvert us. They've proven that time and time again. This group needs to be dealt with head on. You know, one of the things what we're going to finally talk about here at the end of this show, and you know, it's kind of a big move away from where we just were, is this guy who's running Egypt, al-Sisi. He's Jewish. And I agree with the possibility that this report is absolutely spot on. I think this guy, Kevin Barrett, has nailed it. He says that Egypt is an Israeli-occupied territory. I believe that that's true. We have always known, and we've talked about this for the last 8 years, the goal of Israel was to have Israel to have the control of the lands between the Tigris-Euphrates all the way down to the Nile. And it's looking like that plan is underway. Whether or not they'll be successful may hinge upon our ability to push back against the lies they've told. But this guy, al-Sisi, is a dictator. His mother was Jewish, so he's Jewish. His uncle was a Irgun member and a leading Moroccan Jew, worked with Ben Gurion. And he is in charge of Egypt now, so Egypt is being run by a Jew, and this man makes the claim that he's a Don May, which is we've talked about right at the beginning of the program. So maybe you have a statement to make about what you think the possibilities of this are, because we know that Don May are involved in Saudi Arabia. We know that the Caliphate, the supposed royal family of Kuwait, another Don May group. And you'll notice that all of these Don Mays are on the side of the Israeli view of things. And, you know, it's no surprise then that they're destroying Syria. It's no surprise they supported the war in Iraq. It's no surprise they want to get rid of the Iranians and the control that the Iranians have in their region. So where do you come down on this outing here, Mohammed?
Well, I don't have a problem with it in principle in the first instance, because as we've explained, the Don May, the Moranos, these are, you know, eyes wide shut. These are different masks of the same people. They're all Zoharites. When you take away the mask behind all of them, and one of the things that they do, you know, because again, what Sevi said was, as a Zoharite, you can outwardly profess any religion and any belief system you want, as long as you remain a Zoharite. So you can use that as your mask, and that was given as a permission from the outset. And he used his fake conversion to Islam as an example. He said, "I've set you an example to follow. pretend to be Muslim, pretend to be Christian, pretend to be an Orthodox Jew, even though we've burnt the books. You know, I mean, this is one of the things about these people. They will pretend to be anything. They'll pretend to be socialist. They'll pretend to be Nazi. They'll pretend to be communist. Not a problem, as long as they either directly control the power or have sufficient influence over the direct control. They will always be there. And the fact of the matter is, you know, when we look at Egypt, there was a general, wasn't there, Darrell, fairly recently came out and said, and blown the whistle, could have done with him doing it 8 years ago, when we were saying these kinds of things. We look like conspiracy theorists. When he says, oh, I was walking around the White House and shortly after he retired, and one of his old buddies whistled him over and said, we've just been told we're going to invade Iraq. And he said, why? They've got nothing. Have you got proof they had anything to do with 9/11? He said, no, there's no. We just made the decision because presumably they don't know what else to do. You know, and he said, we've got a list, and he went through a list of countries that they were planning to take out that hadn't done anything wrong.
Wesley Clark reported that. Yeah,
that's right. I'd forgotten
and his family, and he's got Jewish roots.
But he's come out and actually outed the fact that that went along. Now, interestingly, in that list of 8 countries, Egypt was not listed. And as you and I have discussed privately, Darrell, the Egyptian revolution was probably the only one which was truly from the people ground up. And what happened was that we ended up with a bit of a mess, because the guy who was brought in representing the Muslim Brotherhood, they could have done a much better choice than Morsi. Morsi was unfortunately aligned with the Takfiri movement, this Bin Laden's religious group, actually. The Takfiris are the people that Bin Laden used to lead when he was working for the CIA. And what's happened is that they aren't happy with that particular structure, and they've created their own Egyptian revolution that wasn't on that roadmap of 8 that General Wesley Clark came out and described. It wasn't in that roadmap, but they realised, and the reason it wasn't is because they were already running the show there. That's why they didn't need to change it, because they were already running that. They'd run it since Nasser. But once it had changed, we've had another revolution, which nobody's prepared to call a military coup, even though the military took control through tanks in the streets, through overthrowing an elected, through a democratic process, leadership. Obama and the rest of his moronic friends refused to call this a military coup. And now the man who's at the head of the military coup happens to come from a Zoharite Jewish background. Not in the least bit surprising at all, Darrell.
Well, and you know, the uprising in the Middle East could have been predicted by anybody with 2 brain cells to rub together. We were Americans, by the printing that the Fed has been doing, has been, and this is the worst consequence, because the tens of millions of people who have lost their lives by dying early from bad nutrition or bad, you know, an inability to afford medical care and so forth. We've been exporting massive amounts of inflation to the third world. And we're talking about peoples who already spend between 30 and 40% of their monthly income on food. And when you double the price of food and heat for these people, and they're now spending 80% of their salary on food, that's nothing left for them to survive. So there's an automatic possibility anywhere that this type of situation exists, that people are going to be in an uproar. And of course, that's exactly what took place. People cooking oil was going through the roof. Foodstuffs were going through the roof. And they, you know, and then to the south of them, where Egypt used to have a good relationship with Ethiopia to get foodstuffs sent in that they weren't growing themselves. Well, we know that the Israelis have been down in Ethiopia and the fertile areas of Sudan and stealing that farmland, stealing it outright through the Janjaweed and others, and then turning it into productive farmland and shipping the food out to the Europeans. And much of that food is making them billions. And you'll note that big agribusinesses that have ties to the Zionist, Zoharitist community are holding sway there. So they didn't have their normal access to their 1,000-year-old Nubian connection to other foods because it'd been stolen over the last 2 decades. And so the whole thing, Mohammed, is a mess, and the murder that has gone on since Morsi's departure has just been part and parcel of the brutality that we all will expect under the control of these people. Take a look at what they did to the Ukrainians and the Russians after they took over that country. Good Lord, I mean, just murder on a wholesale scale, Mohammed. And that's exactly what we're looking forward to anywhere these people are able to hold sway. And this guy being outed is a big thing. I hope the Egyptians are going to take this seriously and do something about it in short order.
Well, I hope so too. I think that they'll be looking into issues about his, as they say in Arabic, the kunya, his family name, his tribal name. They'll be looking at that. Not the element where as a father, but as his clan, if you like. They still have a tradition of that out there, and that usually gives a bit of a clue. You're absolutely right, Darryl. I mean, the reason that Egypt kicked off was decades and decades of poverty. It's ridiculous that the most populous Arabic country, some 80 million people, with the potential for production that they have, being enormous. And they're I know a lot of Egyptians, and they're very hard workers. They're very diligent people. A lot of them, when they're educated, your cognitive skills are very good. They're very intelligent people, but they haven't had 2 cents to rub together. They've lived in poverty for generations, and I think the seeing of I mean when we look at what kicked Algeria off when that fire lit up, which Algeria wasn't on the list of 8 countries, was because a guy was trying to sell the vegetables.
Thinking of Tunisia.
Yeah, Tunisia. Sorry, the guy was trying to sell the vegetables that he'd grown on an allotment just to raise a few quid, and somebody gave him a fine for a parking fine or whatever, which was more than the amount of money that he'd earned for that day, and he just poured petrol on himself and immolated. He just wanted to. He just thought life was not worth living. And I think that, when people make an extreme statement and they're telling the people around them, we shouldn't be living this life. This quality of existence, the transaction's not worth it. I'd rather be dead. It's a dreadful state of affairs that these people, we don't have to look back to what they did in Armenia or what they did in Russia or what they did in the Second World War. We don't need to look at any of that. Right now, they've caused people to live in such deprivation and such a low sense of self-worth that they would rather set fire to themselves than continue the grind and the slog. So that was the stuff, that was the powder keg that they unintentionally lit off, and that they've had to try and subsequently control.